All right, so here's the third member that I'm going to be using. I bought a whole nother axle to get this. Super cheap. It was cheaper to buy this than it was just to buy the yoke by itself that I needed. So this is a real low mileage unit. It's probably got, I don't know, he said around 80, 90,000 miles was on the truck when he took it out. Took the whole axle out. And you know, I know you can't really go by what people say, but if you look at the gears, it's got real low wear on it. There's still the original yellow marking compound. And then when you stick the dial indicator to it just to check backlash, because I kind of want to put it right back where it is, because I'm using the same ring gear, just changing the carrier. So let's check the backlash here. We've got about 11 thousandths, and I saw for used gears anywhere from 8 to 12 is pretty good. So I'm going to stick with that, and then of course when we got it all together, I'll mark up the gear again and we'll check our gear pattern. These 9 inches are pretty easy to do since you don't have to deal with individual shims. You've got these little keepers on the sides and get everything to go in one bin. And what those hold is on the sides here, there are little threaded cups, you could call them. And they thread in, and you can move the carrier side to side to set your backlash. So I've got to disassemble this pretty much all the way because I didn't have it covered, and of course I sprayed it with a bunch of grinding sparks and stuff like that. So we're going to disassemble it all the way here and get the housing all cleaned out, and then we can inspect the pinion bearings as well. But everything is super solid in here. When I took it apart, it still had all the factory clips and all that on the drums, so the drums were never apart. The gear oil was super clean, like it looked like it was just put in. So I believe the guy when he was saying, you know, low mileage. Ooh, you can smell that old gear oil in the bolt holes already. You know, when this oil gets into the bolt holes, it really sticks. So, and I'm just going to make sure I keep these carrier caps on the same side they came off of. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but you can see we've got threads on this outer cap and they push right against the bearings. Well, let's see, how can we get that apart without dropping this whole thing on the ground? I'm just going to take a needle nose and spin it off. Our seal out of the way so we don't tear that. Alright, let's check out these bearings. You know, if these bearings are worn, the pinion bearings are going to be worn. You know, vice versa. If these ones are good, most likely the pinion bearings are good. And those still look real nice. It's too bad we're not using it, because this is just an open carrier. So we don't want that. But then this is also 28 spline, and we're going to 31 spline. Yeah, those bearings look brand new yet. If we were going 28 spline, I would have just left this in here. So now this pinion's got 3 bearings on it. It's got one here at the tip of the pinion, and then here is the carrier, and we'll pull that out so you can see what's going on there. And there's 2 tapered bearings there. Get something under here to catch any residual. Of course, that's a different size. And this carrier, or pinion carrier, only goes on here one way. It's got 5 bolts, but they're a certain sequence that it only lines up one way. Of course, it's got a gear lube flood. So now you got to be careful. You don't want to just shove a screwdriver in there, because there's usually a shim right here on the flange, and that's what sets your pinion depth, is a shim here. There's no shims at the bearing side. It utilizes a crush washer. Or is there a shim there? Nope, there is. It's just buried. So we'll just put this shim right back in, and we should be all set with our pinion depth, because we're not changing anything except for the carrier bearings. You know, and this whole thing will be getting painted, but once it's all together and sealed, then I'm going to wire it up, wire brush it up and clean it. So, and then there's another bearing in here. That one looks just fine. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some sludge stuff in there from sitting. You see it's nice and dark from just sitting on the housing. You know, these Ford 9-inches, they're really user friendly. They're probably one of the easiest differentials to set up. I believe a Corporate 14 bolt is pretty easy to set up as well. Utilizes the same style, same-ish style threaded cups on the carrier. The only thing that's, I think actually, there's even shims just like this one on the pinion. So the Corporate 14 is very similar. So in a heavier duty application, that's probably what I would go with. Because or else you've got shims on both sides of the carrier bearing. You got to take it out, put it in, spread the case, all that to get preload. So I'm going to work on getting this cleaned up, and then we'll start putting everything back together. Alright, so we're going to get the ring gear on now. You know, it's kind of a press fit, so you got to draw it with the bolts up onto the carrier, and that press fit keeps it centered on there so you don't get off a little bit and then it's going around in an egg shape. So what I'm going to do I've got these old bolts. Now, another thing to keep in your head about these 9 inches, if you're switching to a track lock, is the ring gear bolts are 2 different lengths. So the shorter one will be for an open carrier. The longer one will be for a limited slip. So being that this came from a open carrier, I've got to not use the old bolts and use the bolts that were originally with this limited slip carrier. I did get new bolts with my kit, but these are for an open carrier, so we won't be able to use those either. I'm just going to use brake cleaner, spray off each bolt a little bit. You know, just make sure they're clean going in. And then take a little thread locker, put it on there, and you know, you probably need like 6 hands to do this. And just get it started. And we'll do the same, all 10 bolts. I think there's 10. Yeah, 10 bolts. Now, the one other nice thing that's nice about these 9-inch axles is the third member, the actual housing that the gears sit in, that's I'll get a socket here, make these easier to start. The third member housing is the same for all gears, all spline counts, maybe except for 35 spline, but I believe that's pretty much only aftermarket. But you know, you got some Dana axles that you've got a certain carrier that's got an offset flange, you know, to where it's like a 273 through 373 is one carrier, and then 410 and up is another carrier, or you can use thin gears and thick gears, and you know, you just don't need to mess around with a lot of that on these housings. So it's real user friendly. I'm just going to get all these cleaned up, and then we'll draw it up on there. You know, the other nice thing about these 9 inches, these housings, is they're pretty almost universal in the applications that they can go in. You know, they're so lightweight. The aftermarket support on them is pretty incredible. There's so many aftermarket parts. You know, you can get aluminum carrier housings, you can get stronger heavy duty ones, you can get lighter ones. I believe there's even a way to mount it in a high pinion configuration. I've seen people put C-knuckles on them, and they make them a steer axle. I mean, the possibilities are kind of endless on them. The only downside is the pinion sits pretty low. So if you were to use it in like an off-road scenario, you just got to keep that in mind. You know, maybe that's a scenario where you want to flip it. I'm not sure how it's done, you know, as far as the oiling. I'm sure you got to get reverse cut gears or something. But if you flip it to a high pinion configuration, then you'll just want to make sure that you're getting oil where you need it to oil. Because these things, they don't have a pump. So it relies on the ring gear to sling the oil where it goes. Do all these snugged up, and then we'll start drawing it up to the carrier. So we'll just go little by little. Now I can see that it's seated. All right, so now we just got to get those 10 bolts torqued down. And the easiest way, obviously you got to hold this and be able to torque it to, I think it's like 70 to 80 foot-pounds. I'm going to double check that, but easiest way to do that, get it in the press, just press down on there, so that'll hold it, and you'll be able to just use your torque wrench on there. So I'm going to double check that torque spec, and we'll get them torqued. All right, so these are 7/16 bolts, and they go to 70 foot-pounds with thread locker. They also make these carriers with 1/2-inch bolts. Those are a little bit higher. So I've got it pressed in here. No weight on the bearings at all, so those aren't being affected. And we'll see if we can get this torqued. It's a thick socket, so it doesn't want to fit in the recess very well. Need a thinner socket. And I like to just go a couple past where I started, just to make sure it didn't draw it up at all and got loose. I'm still getting a little bit, so we'll just go around 2 full times. And there we go. All right, so now we've got the bolts all torqued down. I threw a little bit of that grease on the bearing. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. But anyway, I threw a little bit of grease on the bearings. Come on, just get in there. Just so it would sit nice in there. Of course, now it doesn't want to. So now we're just going to throw these threaded caps in there. And you just got to make sure you get them into the correct threads. So that you can thread them around. There, that's better. So I'm just going to get this tightened up a little bit. Probably go put it in this space of, shift it over so we're going to have too much backlash. And then we'll flip it over and get the pinion put in. And then we can throw the gauge back on it. So realistically, the pinion depth hasn't changed. So there should be no reason, unless it was set up incorrect before, which the wear on the gears doesn't indicate that. But there should be no reason that we should need to change the pinion depth. Just got to make sure all the threads are doing thread things. Alright, so that's going to hold that. We'll get it flipped over here and we'll get the pinion in there. Still a bit of gear lube squeezing out of those clutch plates. Alright, now I just clean the surface up to make sure we don't have any junk that's going to pinch between there. Probably should have cleaned this up a little bit beforehand, but like I said, I've got a new O-ring. This is just an O-ring seal in here that seals this to the housing. And it's extremely inexpensive to just put a new O-ring in there. But that's all tight. It doesn't just free spin, so it does have some bearing preload left on it. I'm going to call that good enough. Get it wiped down here so we know we're going back together clean. Yeah, and this snout right here, this is where the third bearing rides right here, so it's really well supported. I think they even use this in racing applications. Obviously not with just stock parts, but you know, there's enough parts to beef them up to where they get strong enough to be able to hold plenty of horsepower. Get that O-ring out of there. Yeah, O-ring's not even round anymore. So that should sit in there pretty good. Scrape some of this rust off the very edge. I just want it to sit as flat as possible. Yeah, that really does spin nice, so I don't have any concerns about the bearings in there. So let's get new O-ring here. And we've got our shim. I probably should have cleaned up the bolts too, but there we are. Alright, so I'm just going to put a little bit of assembly lube on that O-ring so it doesn't tear. You don't want to tear your O-ring. So now there's these flat spots around the 5-bolt circle. This thing only goes in one way. Kind of thinking my gears are too close together. I'm not allowing it to. I mean, I probably did this backwards. You know, probably should have put the pinion in first, but here we are. There we go. Yeah, I just didn't have enough backlash in there. There we go. If you lube that O-ring up, it falls right into place. So I'm going to zip that down. Get off of there. Alright, so now the pinion housing is fully seated. Now we can check our backlash and try to get some preload on those bearings and still have the correct amount of backlash. got to make sure that these cap bolts stay snug. Or else your threads on your adjusters don't want to work properly. I'm willing to bet that's probably too much. All right, so now that we've got everything in there, we're going to take our dial indicator, pick a tooth on the gears, and see what we've got for the backlash. Make sure that's in a solid spot. Got 65. Got about 20 thousandths right now. So got to loosen the one side and tighten the other one. Oh, did I tighten those down or what? And I just went pretty far, so that's about 4 thousandths. So we're aiming for 10. That's about 6. So now it's that fine adjustment. So 68. So right there we're at about 9.5. So I'm going to just tighten side to put the preload on it. It'll push it away from the pinion. So 80. Right there is 10.5. So I'm going to tighten up the bolts and check it again, make sure nothing moves. Now let's see where we're at. So I moved it, so we're starting at about 75. Just under 75. So we got about 10.5 thousandths. I'm happy with that. So we've got some preload on there. Just spin this a little bit. Yeah, that runs pretty nice. So I'm going to clean the teeth off here, and we'll get some marking compound on there and see what it looks like. You know, since we've got it back to right about where it was, it should be pretty good. And you got to mark both sides. And I'll put some tension on it. And that looks pretty good. It's right in the center of the tooth, not too deep, not too shallow. Right where it was before. So that'll be pretty good there. Now we can just put our retainer clips back on. You know, as long as nothing comes loose, it really should. These probably don't do a whole lot. But I would hate to see what happens if you didn't put them on. You know, and I'm going to torque these cap bolts too. You know, so they're setting. So, all right, and there you have it. Now we have a 31 spline track lock carrier in this third member. And this is ready to go into the housing of the 55 Chevy. And we'll get that in there soon. I've got new axle shafts for it that bring it down, bring our bolt pattern to the correct pattern to match the front. Because this came with 5 on 5.5 from the factory. And we're going to be going to 5 on 4 3/4 to match our Mustang 2 front suspension. So I've got cut to fit axles, stuff like that, and we'll have to figure those out, and disc brake kit and all that. So if you want to see more of this, see this get in the truck and see how the truck turns out, make sure you like and subscribe, and follow along with Matchnik Garage, and we'll work on getting this truck back on the road. Thanks for watching.